Toni Riley, CIA Museum Director Emeritus. So Toni Riley is an Albuquerque native who directed operations for the CIA Museum for 2 decades. Ms. Riley holds a bachelor's degree in history from the University of Maryland, European Division, and received her museum training through the Smithsonian and the U.S. Army's Center for Military History. She joined the Central Intelligence Agency in 1999 and is now a consultant to the intelligence community and other selected organizations on museum best practices. Ms. HILEY is passionate about using history and culture to educate, inspire, and engage people through inventive museum exhibits, informative publications, and multimedia. So welcome, Toni. Thank you so much for agreeing to talk to our group. Are you there?
Thank you, Katrina.
Oh,
I am.
Okay, so you're on.
Great, thank you so much. Can you silence the microphone there?
Thursday. Okay.
Yeah, we can do.
We can try, but I'm afraid without doing the share screening and Zoom, this is like herding cats. And
Okay.
so if it's not a distraction to you, I would like to leave the microphone on, and all of our people will be very, very quiet. We promised, they promised me that this morning. And also, if you see a hand and someone wants to ask a question during your presentation, if that's okay with you, then having the microphone on would be a benefit.
Okay, let's give it a try. So I see a great group of volunteers there. I wish I could be there with you in person, but I really appreciate everybody coming in for this and making time to learn a little bit about CIA aviation. So I've got a lot of material to cover, but first of all, I want to thank Dudley for all of his work to set this up. I really appreciate that, Dudley, and I appreciate you driving. And shout out to Debbie, who found a 2007 picture of me to use in advertising the talk. So I appreciate looking a lot younger for advertising than I actually am. It's interesting to use that picture because that was taken the day that we dedicated our A-12, and I'm going to show that to you when we get to that time period. And then Katrina, thanks for the introduction, and just a shout out to Jim Kidrick as well. Jim recently served as a peer reviewer on the the Nuclear Museum of Science and History, National Nuclear Museum of Science and History here in Albuquerque. And that's how I originally connected with you all, was through Jim, as I was doing some benchmarking with your museum on care and feeding of the A-12. So thanks to Jim for his help on our reaccreditation here. So like you, I am a volunteer. I volunteer at the Nuclear Museum. I serve as a trustee. I'm the secretary, and I love volunteering. I actually was one of a dozen volunteers who helped restore our MiG-21. We put in 23 volunteer hours to make that a nice, bright, shiny object. I know we're going to get a complaint from Albuquerque Tower one of these days. The pilots on final approach are going to be blinded by this beautiful, shiny MiG-21 down in our air park. But if you can imagine me at my age scrambling around a Soviet aircraft with a power sander, it was a lot of fun. And so if you have a chance to visit Albuquerque, make time to see the Nuclear Museum. We have the largest publicly accessible air park in New Mexico. We have B-52, we have a B-29, we have a MiG, a 105, and a lot of nuclear capable missiles, and quite an interesting collection. So shout out for our little museum. So we've got a lot of territory to cover today. And I thought it was important, knowing that some of you are aviators, for me to share my bona fides to speak to you on aviation history. So Dudley, if you could drive me to the next slide. So this is pretty much my bona fides for speaking to you today. I'm simply a kid whose dad was a pilot. I grew up in the Air Force. My dad spent 27 years as a career pilot, and we were stationed here in Albuquerque. I was born here. We were in and out of here because he was with Defense Nuclear Agency. So like some of you, I love aviation history. I think I naturally gravitated to CIA's aviation history as the museum director, and that's what I want to share with you today. I was that kid who went to every Armed Forces Day. I used to lay down on the runway, wait for the planes to take off. Of course, a lot of those were propeller driven when I was a kid. And I love the smell of aviation fuel and sweat. You all know that smell because that meant that Dad was home. So those are my credentials for speaking to you today. Let's have the next slide. So CIA's aviation history starts in the early 50s, actually. We were created with the National Security Act, same as the U.S. Air Force in 1947. And in 1946, General Claire Chennault had established Civil Air Transport. That's the predecessor to Air America you're probably more familiar with. The picture there shows General Chennault with Wild Bill Donovan, our World War II predecessor, head of the Office of Strategic Services, CIA's World War II predecessor. And Madame Chiang Kai-shek had asked General Claire Chennault to establish the Nationalist Chinese Airline in 1946. But when Mao took over in 1949, Chennault had to move those air assets off of the mainland China over to Taiwan. And CIA gave him $500,000 to do that. And then in 1950, CIA purchased that airline. So the slides I'm going to show you are going to be a mixture of artifacts from CIA Museum, like the Civil Air Transport, what would you call that, bag that you see there, and some of the Civil Air Transport documents. Those are from the commercial side of Civil Air Transport. It had a clandestine side, a covert side, as well as a commercial side. So let's go to the next slide. We're going to tee up a story that involved using the All-American system, which had been developed by the Postal Department to pick up mail from remote areas. And the military looked at it in 1943 to help rescue pilots who had been downed. If you watch videos of the All-American system in action, it yanks a pilot off the ground. So I don't know if they designed it to encourage pilots not to have to be picked up off the ground since it's such a wild ride or what. But this is eventually going to turn into Fulton's Skyhook system, which I'm going to tell you a story about as well. But just wanted to flag the All-American system for you here and its use during the war. CIA is going to use it in 1952. So let's see the next slide, Deborah, please. Some of the images I'm going to use in my talk today are based on paintings that we did for CIA's intelligence art collection, and this is one of them. So the painting is called Ambush in Manchuria. It's by Drew Blair, who's one of the leading airbrush artists in the United States. So CIA has a mission in 1952 to fly into Manchuria, so communist China now had taken over in 1949. This mission is going to fly into Manchuria to exfil an agent. Now, the operation required their C-47 to make a pass over the target area, drop that extraction system, the All-American system, and then return about 45 minutes later with a hook down to pull out the asset. So flying that day are Norman Schwartz and Robert Stoddy. They're two Civil Air Transport pilots. And back in the fuselage are two CIA paramilitary officers, Jack Downey and Dick Fecteau. What we didn't know is that asset that we were trying to exfil had been compromised. And the Chinese military were alert to the mission. They were waiting in ambush, and they shot the plane down. The pilots died in the crash. 2 stars on CIA's memorial wall. And the 2 paramilitary officers in the back of the aircraft survived. They were captured by the Chinese and held in prison for 2 decades. Now, there's a really good documentary film about this that CIA produced that you can find on YouTube. It's called Extraordinary Fidelity. So I recommend that to you. I can send you a link, and I have other references to my talk that I can send you. And I'm happy to send you some of our publications for your volunteer library as well. Just let me know. So while Facto and Downey were in prison, the agency took care of them. We promoted them, we banked their salary. When Nixon started to open up China, we were able to get them out. Both men said that they never wanted that experience in China to define who they later became. One returned to his alma mater, became a coach, and the other one became a municipal judge. Both men came to CIA several years ago to receive our highest award for valor, the Distinguished Intelligence Cross. In our entire history, it's only been presented 39 times. It's like our Medal of Honor. And you have 4 of them associated with this operation. The 2 pilots posthumously received the Distinguished Intelligence Cross, and then Facto and Downey several years after they came out of China. So let's go on to the next one.
What?
So we're moving forward to 1954. This painting is by artist Jeff Bass. It's called Earthquake's Final Flight. So in 1954, in Southeast Asia, Dien Bien Phu, the French have been fighting against the Viet Minh. And they're pinned down at Dien Bien Phu. They're surrounded by the Viet Minh, and they can't resupply their troops. So they reach out, the French reach out to the United States to ask for help. And CIA provides pilots. We provide 37 civil air transport pilots. I'm going to refer to my notes here too, as we go along. So 37 CAT pilots flew 682 airdrops between the 13th of March and the 6th of May, 1954. Many of those flights were flown through murderous anti-aircraft fire, like you see here. And flying this particular day, on the 6th of May, the day before the Viet Minh overran the French fortifications, you see the C-119 flown by a legendary CAT pilot by the name of James McGovern. His nickname was Earthquake McGovern. His co-pilot's Wallace Buford. There's some French kickers on board. And you can see that the plane has been hit. The horizontal stabilizers damaged. The engine, the cell is streaming oil. The engine has stopped. Is that the port engine? That's a left engine, right?
Yeah.
Port?
Yes.
Sorry, not. Okay, thank you. Port engine has been knocked out, and this plane doesn't like to fly on one engine. It really almost doesn't like to fly on 2, but it really doesn't like to fly on one engine. But McGovern and Buford kept it in the air for 45 minutes until it finally crashed inside Laos, where the wreckage remained unrecovered until 2002. Finally, a team was allowed to go into Laos to recover McGovern's remains. And he was buried in Arlington in 2007. And CIA Museum was able to collect a few pieces of this aircraft. The loss of McGovern and Buford represent the first American losses in the conflict we call the Vietnam War. We have all the details for this painting. I don't know if you can see the figure standing in the open cargo bay there of the fuselage.
Yes.
That's the French kicker, Jean Arlot. He survived the crash. And when we did this painting in 2004, we consulted with him, and he gave us a lot of details on the aircraft. Pretty cool that he was able to weigh in on it. So the US markings had been painted out with French. You'll note that as well. So let's go on to the next one. I'm going to go at a clip because I have a lot of information to share with you. So this painting is from our collection. It's called Piercing the Curtain. It's by Drew Blair again. And it depicts the U-2's first operational overflight over the Soviet Union, the 4th of July, 1956. So let's back up a little bit and talk about the U-2 program. So the Soviets tested their atomic bomb in 1949, and by 54, they had a heavy bomber that could deliver a nuclear weapon and strike our country. And CIA's job had to be telling the president what the Soviets were capable of and what their intentions were. How are we going to get that intelligence? CIA did not have assets recruited inside the Soviet Union until 1953 with Paul. We were getting intelligence out through German POWs that were coming out after the war, through emigres. Air Force was sending reconnaissance flights up along the border. With the Soviet Union, those were being routinely shot at and shot down. The president needed to know what the Soviets were capable of and what their intentions were. So you can almost imagine the country asking itself, what are we not doing that if we did it would be a game changer? And the answer was to overfly the Soviet Union and photograph the military infrastructure. But we had to fly high enough to be above their ground-to-air missiles and above their MiGs. All of a sudden, that means we need to fly at 65 to 70,000 feet. There wasn't an aircraft in the inventory that could do that. And if you put a military pilot in the cockpit, that will be considered an act of war. So CIA gets the job, and we work with a brilliant aeronautical engineer out at Lockheed Skunk Works by the name of Kelly Johnson, and Kelly designs the U-2 for us. I love this next part. The scope of work for the U-2 was a page and a half. The entire project, 25 pages long. Kelly delivered the drawings to us in 30 days, delivered the prototype aircraft to us in less than 8 months, under budget, gave us $2 million back, and kept it secret. From signing the contract in 1954 to first operational flight over the Soviet Union, 4 July 1956, 18 months. Couldn't happen today. So flying the aircraft this day, on the 4th of July 1956, is Herbie Stockman. Herbie had been a P-51 pilot during the war. And he's going to fly for CIA for 2 years, between 56 and 58, that he's going to return to real Air Force. In 1967, he's flying an F-4 over North Vietnam when they have a midair, and he and his navigator had to punch out. They were picked up by the North Vietnamese the next day and held in prison for 6 years. So he's also a POW. And I got to interview him here in Albuquerque. He retired here in Albuquerque. He's actually buried up in Santa Fe National Cemetery. And I interviewed him back, I think it was about 2011 or so. And he was just as strack as he must have been as a P-51 pilot. But he said to me something I thought was really interesting. He said he was very proud to have flown for the CIA for 2 years. North Vietnamese never found out about his CIA affiliation. And he was very proud of having a 33-year career in the Air Force. But he told me that one of the things he was proudest of is that as a POW, they were able to get intelligence out. They used a tap code. Some of you may have been trained in that as pilots yourselves. And some of the most important intelligence they could tap out was who else was being held prisoner. So if you look at this painting, you can imagine the challenges that we had in doing it. The aircraft that flew this mission is actually at the Smithsonian. It used to be in Air and Space downtown. Air and Space has renovated, and I'm not sure where that aircraft, if it's going to go back into Air and Space downtown, or if it's going to move out to Uberhasi, so I'm not sure where it is now. So I know that the plane that Herbie flew is in the Air and Space Museum, that he flew a U-2A, and the plane has been converted to a U-2C. But I contacted Smithsonian to see if they had any pictures of the cockpit, because let me tell you, if in our organization, if we don't get things 100% right, then we're not doing our job. So I know there's going to be somebody who's going to be walking the hallways, going to look at this painting and be able to tell if it's accurate or not. So I have to help the artist get it right. So I contacted Smithsonian to see if they had any pictures of the original cockpit, and they didn't. So I said, well, you know, Air Force Museum loans these aviation assets to museums all over the country. I'll check with Air Force Museum and see if they have any U-2A cockpit pictures, and they didn't have any. Well, it's CIA's aircraft, maybe we do. So I turned the record center upside down, didn't find anything. And then I reached out to Lockheed, because after all, they built the aircraft. And my friend out at Lockheed said, you know what you need is a U2A-1 pilot's utility manual. And I said, well, do you have one? And he said, no, but I think I might know where one is. So he contacted Beale Air Force Base, just north of Ewell, where the U2s fly out of today. And they found a U2A-1 pilot's utility manual dated 1959, stuffed in the back of a safe, still classified, sent it to me, I put it through declassification, and then we had the images of the cockpit that we needed. So I high-res scanned them, sent it out to the artist, and the way the printing process was back in the 50s, the images were laid down in little tiny dots. So when I high-res scanned it, all Drew could see, all the artist could see were these little tiny dots. He said, I can't use this image, Tony. So I said, what am I going to do now? And what I did was go to the clandestine photography people at CIA, and I asked them if they could fill in the dots, and they did. So that's how we got our high-res image of the cockpit. I worked with Louis Setter, who helped train U2 pilots, and he said, you know, up at that altitude, if you look at the right hand of the cockpit there, up at that altitude, you'll get a little bit of frost on the canopy. He said we always flew with a pencil and a compass, and the target that day in the viewfinder there on the cockpit is Leningrad. And then I had, because you were pilots, some of you were pilots, I had to get the instrument settings correct. So at the time, the head of our military office, the Associate Director for Military Affairs, was a F-117 pilot, General Chakowski. And so he gave me the readings. Now there's one instrument that is incorrect, only the pilots know. So I'll let you take a look at that and see if you can tell me which one's incorrect. But that's what we went through to get this picture right for you. So let's go on to the next one. So CIA flew the U-2. It was our program from 1954 to 74. We turned the aircraft over to the Air Force in 74. Turned the program over to the Air Force in 1974. We lost 4 U-2 pilots in the program. There are 4 stars on our wall. Rose, Grace, and Carrie were all killed in 1956. Now, it's a squirrely aircraft to fly, from what I understand. It has a very narrow flight envelope. You know, it had to fly nose up. If the pilot dropped the nose, then it would pick up airspeed, and that could pull the aircraft apart. Buster Edens, interesting, he was pulled out of the program in 1963-64 to train on a specially outfitted U-2 that they were going to fly off an aircraft carrier in the South Pacific. The French were popping nukes in the South Pacific. We wanted to be able to monitor those. So Buster Edens was part of a group of U-2 pilots who were trained to fly off of an aircraft carrier. So getting off the aircraft carrier wasn't the dicey part, it was landing back on it. But they had to beef up the undercarriage so it could take that impact of the carrier landing. So let's go on to the next one. So we're in 1959 in Tibet now. Let me fast forward here with my notes. Excited, I'm going to get ahead on notes. So in the summer of 1950, remember Mao had taken over in 49. In 1950, communist Chinese troops invaded Tibet. And they seized a part of Tibet where the Khampas live. They're a party collection of Tibetan clans with a reputation for ferocity. So CIA was asked by President Eisenhower to provide covert assistance to the Tibetan resistance movement, which we did. We trained, brought Tibetans over here to the United States. Initially, we trained them at Catalina, near Ewell, but they didn't do well at sea level. They're used to living up at 12, 13,000 feet. So we ended up training them up at Camp Hay in Colorado. And starting in 1959, pilots and crews of Civil Air Transport again started secretly dropping CIA-trained Tibetans back into Tibet with more than 250 tons of material, arms, ammunition, radios, medical supplies, and such. Initially, we were using DC-6s and B-17s, but they didn't have the cargo capability that we needed. So the painting captures the first C-130B airdrop. Artist made a mistake. He painted a C-130A. The propellers, as he painted them, are 3, but they should be 4. So that's another mistake that you all might notice, you pilots might notice. So the pilot, we're up in the Himalayas. We don't have GPS, right? We're using celestial navigation and landmarks. And Mount Everest is off to one side of us. We're going to drop at 12,000 feet. The landing zone is 11,000 feet. There's no time for a reserve chute. And on this particular mission, we've pulled in kickers and Civil Air Transport personnel who have experience doing these kind of operations to drop 12 CIA-trained Tibetan paramilitaries and 5 cargo pallets. Everything lands within 16 seconds. I mean, everything's dropped within 16 seconds. Everybody lands successfully. One of the cargo pallets went into the water, but they recovered it. So very successful operation here for the Tibetans. The Tibetan resistance, support to the Tibetan resistance folded in 1974 as President Nixon was opening up China. So let's go on to the next one. I'm going chronologically, so we're in 1961 now with Bay of Pigs. So to provide air support for the Bay of Pigs operation, CIA reached out to the Alabama Air National Guard to help recruit pilots, maintenance personnel, and use their A-26 invaders. And I know some of you are flinching because your Air Force probably, and Air Force calls it a B-26. But to me that's confusing because the A-26 Invader is a different aircraft from the B-26 Marauder. So there were a number of pilots who flew Bay of Pigs A-26 Invaders who had flown them during the war, and they referred to them as A-26s during Bay of Pigs, and still do. So as a salute to the pilots, I'm going to call it an A-26.
Hey, Tony?
So these, yeah.
You said this is a 1961 operation, but the slide shows 2008. So I'm assuming that 2008 is the date of the picture.
Yeah, that's because the painting was done in 2008, so that's my mistake. I've gone back and forth between giving you the date of the painting and the date of the operation. I need to clean up my slides. I saw that when I was reviewing them this morning again. So sorry to confuse, but yes, Bay of Pigs is 1961, April, and the painting was done in 2008. Okay?
Thank you.
So the Alabama Air National Guard pilots and crews that that volunteered for this operation, which was clearly a sensitive and very risky endeavor, they helped train Cuban pilots down in Nicaragua under very oppressive and debilitating conditions. The heat and humidity were terrible down there. So I'm not going to do a deep dive into Bay of Pigs, other than to say that President Kennedy cut the air support, so that's part of what led to the failure. But the CIA pilots Connie Seacrest and Doug Price had asked for permission to lead a flight of A-26s in support of the ground troops, and that's what this painting depicts. It was a very successful mission on the 18th of April, 1961, when 6 of CIA's A-26s took off from Happy Valley in Nicaragua and flew against a Cuban convoy. And the operation resulted in 30 vehicles destroyed and inflicted some 900 casualties. Connie Seacrest is flying this aircraft. He was one of our legendary pilots, 30,000 hours in agency aircraft, if you can imagine. And we also remember that the next day that A-26s flew again, and this time 4 of our CIA airmen of our Alabama Air National Guard volunteers lost their lives, and their names are here. They are stars on our wall. They also received the Distinguished Intelligence Cross. So these are 4 of the 39 that we honor with the DIC. Let's go to the next one. So the painting was finished in 2007. The operation takes place in 1962. The painting is by Keith Woodcock. It's called 7 Days in the Arctic. So in the late 50s, the Soviets are building a series of ice stations up in the Arctic. And we think what they're trying to do is monitor our nuclear subs. And the military is telling the president that the Cold War is going to get hot over the Arctic. So the Office of Naval Research actually has a mission in 1961 to try to land a team onto one of the Soviet ice stations. The Soviets have built a series of floating ice stations, and the mission is going to try to drop a team onto the ice to collect the intel as the Soviets abandon these ice stations. You know, the ice moves, and the Soviets have to hurriedly abandon the ice stations sometimes. So there's an opportunity for the intelligence community to collect the intelligence if we can get onto the ice. So what air assets do we have in the early 60s that can fly a team in, drop in, and recover them? Helicopters don't have the range. Navigating in the Arctic is very dicey. Pan Am's doing polar flights. Maybe we can get a Pan Am navigator in. And then the funding runs out for the Navy. So CIA picks up the mission, and in 1962, one of our proprietary B-17s, flying out of Intermountain Aviation in Arizona, flown by Connie Seacrest, co-piloted by Doug Price, they practiced with the Fulton extraction system to then drop 2 intelligence collectors on the ice and recover them several days later. So the 2 intelligence collectors are going to be a Navy Lieutenant J.G. Leonard Leshak and Air Force Major James Smith, both with experience working in the Arctic. Pilots are Connie Seacrest, Doug Price. We've got some Air America kickers in the back. And they've been practicing with the Fulton Skyhook system for this operation. The Skyhook system consists of a balloon tied to a 500-foot cable and an engine to inflate that balloon. So you can see in the little graphic next to the painting how it would work. And then there's a yoke that attaches to the front of the aircraft. So Seacrest and Price are experts in agent exfiltration. The Fulton Skyhook system is state-of-the-art at this time. And we do get that Pan Am navigator in to get us there. Leshak and Smith are dropped onto the ice. The plan is to recover them 4 days later. It ends up being 7 days because of weather. But flying at 120 knots, at 425 feet above the ice, the B-17 first hooks 150 pounds of intelligence that Leshak and Smith have collected, and then returns to pick up Leshak. So Poor Captain Leshak, he is dragged forward across the ice on his stomach 300 feet before he's lifted in, and then he's lifted in facing the wind. He can't get his breath, so he has to thrash his way around to put his back to the wind. He's finally hauled into the aircraft, and then we return for Smith. But successful mission, 150 pounds of intelligence collected, both men recovered off the ice. So the painting depicts that very moment that Leshak is picked up off the ice. This is one of my favorite stories, I think. And we had the opportunity to interview Leonard Leshak, so we have a little documentary about him as well. Let's go on to the next one. So Keith Woodcock also did this painting in 2008. The history it captures is in the early 60s, between 1964 and 1965. So Air America is flying in Southeast Asia in support of CIA operations. We're in Laos here in this painting. We're on the plain of Jars, which is one of the most heavily bombed pieces of land on the planet. You can see next to the painting there to the right, you can see those Laotian jars. Let me find my notes on exactly what those are. Those are, we think they were funerary urns from an early people that lived in this part of the world. Actually, Lao legend has it that giants lived in this part of their country, and these are empties left over from the drinking bench. Actually, but there's one in the Smithsonian, and I think they're a really cool part of this painting. So you'll see in the painting a number of aircraft. This is a notional tribute to the Airman's Bond. It's unlikely you would have seen all of these aircraft up in the air at one time, but you've got a UH-34D there in the foreground, which is an Air America bird. You've got T-28D attack aircraft. You've got an O-1 Bird Dog up, a Ravens up, doing the spotting for the T-28 attacks, and you've got an A-1E bomber that's crashed. So between 1964 and 65, before the military started flying in this area, Air America was supporting CIA operations, as I said, and we started doing the search and rescue for American military that were starting to fly then in the area. The Air Force didn't have search and rescue, a robust search and rescue effort on the plain of Jars. So Air America actually rescued 21 pilots between 1964 and 65. The agency really didn't keep strong records on how many military Air America did rescue. There's a wonderful article that I can send you if you'd like to read it by, let me think of his name real quick. Craig During. Craig During was the U.S. Air Force Undersecretary for Manpower and Reserve Affairs under E-43. And he was a Raven, and he tells an incredible story. Dudley, if you remind me, I'll send you a link to it that you can share with everybody. He tells an incredible story of being out in his aircraft and being low on fuel when weather rolled in. And Air America helicopter pilots went up 3 at a time and stretched themselves out until they got him and then vectored him back in. So he landed safely. It's quite an incredible tale. So this painting is to that kind of camaraderie and the Airman's Bond. Let's go to the next one. So Lima Site 85 is a U.S. radar facility inside Laos, about 150 nautical miles from Hanoi. And there is a radar site on top of this 2,000-foot foot mountain at about 4,000 feet in elevation, I guess. And on top is a radar site that President Johnson wants to be upgraded to provide round-the-clock bombing. So the Air Force Heavy Green Project comes in, and in late '67 finishes the upgrade to the radar site, so now they can direct B-52 and F-105 strikes in the North Vietnam round the clock, which is what the president wants. Well, this construction project doesn't go unnoticed by the North Vietnamese. And in January of 1968, the North Vietnamese Air Force attacks the site. They come in flying those AN-2 Colt biplanes, which have been converted to bombers. The North Vietnamese have cut a hole in the bottom of the fuselage, and they're dropping incendiary devices down on the radar site. So Air Force personnel are manning the radar site. They're undercover as Lockheed employees because we're in Laos. And according to the 1962 Geneva Conventions, there's not supposed to be any military effort in Laos, but President Kennedy has asked for a covert war in Laos, and the military and CIA are there supporting that effort. So just downhill from the radar site is a CIA base. So the North Vietnamese attack the site. Actually, 4 AN-2 Colt biplanes come in, 2 attack the sites, 2 are loitering nearby. And Air America Huey has just finished delivering ammunition to the site when the biplanes attack. So the pilot and flight mechanic take off after the biplane. Air America aircraft were not armed, but the flight mechanic generally packed heavy, and so he takes out his AK and fires at the biplane. The other one's trying to escape. One hits the mountain and one is shot down. This was an air combat first. It's the only time in the entire Vietnam War that a rotary aircraft shot down a fixed-wing aircraft. 2 months later, the North Vietnamese attacked the site again. And this time, Dak Kong sappers scaled that 2,000-foot mountain, overran the site. 11 Air Force personnel were killed, highest ground casualty incident for Air Force during the Vietnam War. Next slide. The NCO in charge was, the non-commissioned officer in charge was Chief Master Sergeant Etchberger. And during this firefight, he's helping, Air America has come in to help rescue the Americans, the Air Force personnel off the site. And the Air America Huey is actually hovering on the edge of this cliff while Rusty Irons, the flight mechanic, reaches down to help pull Air Force personnel onto the Huey. And one of the last people off the mountain was Chief Master Sergeant Etchberger. So Rusty Irons, Air America flight mechanic, reaches down for Etchberger, pulls him onto the Air America Huey, sets him down, the plane banks, it takes fire and Etchberger's hit. And he bleeds out before they can get him back to base. For his heroics on the mountain that day, the Medal of Honor was discussed. But again, we're in Laos in a covert war, and you can't give the Medal of Honor quietly, right? So the Air Force Cross was presented, first NCO to receive, Air Force NCO to receive the Air Force Cross. And because it was a clandestine operation, covert operation, the story goes quiet. But in 1993-94, historian Tim Castle is one of the first Americans to get to the site. He writes a book called One Day Too Long. That book appears on General Schwartz's reading list, Chief Staff of the Air Force in 2009, and the Medal of Honor is revisited. Tim and I had the honor of being at the White House this day when President Obama presented the Medal of Honor to Chief Master Sergeant Etchberger's sons 42 years later. Pretty incredible story. Let's go to the next one. Pilatus Porter short takeoff and landing aircraft. It can land on a runway about the size of a football field. And you can see in the photograph right below what the airstrip looked like. So this was the workhorse of the covert war in Laos. We're working with the Hmong people led by General Bang Pao, as you can see in the painting. Upcountry meeting here. This is again by Drew Blair. And to the right is a legendary paramilitary officer by the name of Bill Blair. He worked very closely with Bang Pao, the leader of the Hmong. So this particular, in the painting by Keith Woodcock again, is Pilatus Porter flown by Lee Gossett, one of CIA's pilots. And Lee flew for Continental Air Services, which was another proprietary airline. At one point, CIA had the second largest air force in the world. So this was one of those aircraft. But you can imagine what the flying must have been like in and out of those mountains, with weather rolling in, like I said earlier, and to deliver food and supplies, and work very closely with the Hmong. So I wanted to share this with you as well. Let's go to the next one. Okay, now we're talking, right?
I love this.
So we talked about the U-2 program, and you know they thought the U-2 would be good to go over the Soviet Union for about 2 years before the Soviets even saw us. But they picked up that first overflight. They picked up Kirby's overflight on radar that Roosevelt had sold to Stalin during World War II under the Lend-Lease program. They couldn't shoot us down until 1960 when the Powers were shot down. So already in 1956, Eisenhower knows he's got to have another option. And again, you can see the country asking itself, what are we not doing that if we did it would be a game changer? And that's the answer right there. Let's fly a plane 3 miles higher. So we're already flying at 70,000 feet, and it's 1957. We want to fly 3 miles higher, and we can beat the radar if we fly almost 5 times faster. So by 1959, CIA's A-12 Oxcart's on the drawing board. This aircraft was 2.5 decades ahead of its time. It was first tested in '62. It met its design specifications in 1965. But by then, the country had again asked itself, what are we not doing that if we did it would be a game changer? That game changer was, let's photograph the Soviet Union from space. And here's a wonderful little juxtaposition of history for you. The very day that Powers was sentenced to 10 years in prison is the 18th of August, 1960. That very same day, we had the first successful Corona mission, first photo reconnaissance satellite. And in Corona's first mission, it photographs more of the Soviet Union than all those U-2 flights combined. Hugely forward in technology. So the A-12's lost its mission until what this painting depicts is 31 May 1967, when Mel Bobadich comes in hot at Mach 3.1 at 80,000 feet to photograph missile sites throughout Southeast Asia. And let me get the statistics for you exactly for what Mel got that day. With a total flight time of 3 hours and 39 minutes, photo interpreters found no surface-to-surface missiles that might threaten U.S. and Allied military forces in the South. His imagery also assessed the status of 70 of the 190 known surface-to-air missile sites and 9 other priority targets. That intelligence that mission got helped save my dad's life. So that pilot with the little kid that I showed you in that opening slide, he's now flying 23 combat missions out of the 405th Fighter Wing, Park Air Base, Philippines, Chuck Yeager commanding. I went to school with Yeager's kids. So thanks to the intelligence that the A-12 is getting, my dad knows where the missiles are that can shoot him down. And then I've given you also, I thought you'd find this interesting, there is a map of that first mission. So flying out of Kadena, no Chinese or North Vietnamese radar tracked the aircraft that day, nor did North Vietnam fire any missiles at it. The A-12 for its first 3 to 4 months was untouchable by hostile air defenses. So the A-12 still holds the altitude and speed record for a piloted air-breathing jet, 90,000 feet, Mach 3.29, 60 years ago, which I know you love your A-12 as much as we love ours. I think it's just extraordinary. I like to say that the aircraft had 3 computers on board. One between the pilot's ears, the other was a slide rule, and the third was yellow with a lead on one end and an eraser at the other. And it still holds the altitude and speed record. So let's go to the next one. This is another very important mission that the A-12 flew. Drew Blair is the artist of both those paintings. This painting was finished in 2012. This mission takes place in January of 1968. The North Koreans have seized the USS Pueblo, and an A-12 mission was launched 3 days later to overfly North Korea, to photograph it, to confirm that North Korea was not building up militarily in response to the Pueblo. And you can see the imagery there to the right with the Pueblo in the little box. So Jack Weeks flew this mission. The administration was hesitant to grant permission for the overflight until we told President Nixon that the plane would only be over the target area 7 minutes. So let's go to the next slide. So only 15 A-12s were built, only 9 remain. We have number 8, you have number 10. But there was a program between 1961 and 1972 to mount a drone on the back of a modified A-12. And in that configuration, that mother-daughter configuration, which you can see up at Seattle's Museum of Flight, in that configuration, there were 4 test flights. On the 4th test flight, flying in that mother-daughter configuration, Bill Park, Lockheed's chief test pilot, was flying that day. Ray Torek was in the back seat. One of the modifications included putting a launch systems officer in the back seat. And then you've got an 11,000-pound drone sitting on the back of the A-12 that's got to get up and away, right? And it didn't that day. Instead of getting up and away, it came down and crashed into the mother bird, and that knocked both the drone and the A-12 out of control. So all that, those air bodies are tumbling to the Pacific Ocean. Somehow, Bill got out of it, and he got into his rescue craft, but we don't know what happened to Walter Ray, to Ray Torek. Either when he hit the ocean, his faceplate popped, or his suit had been cut with wreckage, or somehow, his suit filled with water and we lost him. And this upset Kelly Johnson so much that he wanted to cancel the entire program. But the target was Chinese nuclear test intelligence out of Western China, and that was pretty important to our country at the time. So what the Air Force ended up doing, the program moved over to Air Force. They ended up modifying B-52H, and as you can see in that picture, taking the 2 drones up for redundancy, 1 under each wing, adding a ramjet engine so that the B-52 could drop the drone, which would then fly up to 85,000 feet, fly a pre-programmed flight path over the target area, fly up to friendly territory, kick its bucket out, and then a 119 or a C-130 would pick up the payload. So in that configuration, there were 4 operational flights. 2 were successful, and 2 were not. One time they missed the bucket, and another time the drone crashed in northern China. So bad day at Black Rock there. But when you think this is late 60s and we're pushing the envelope of the A-12 and drone operations, I think it's pretty extraordinary stuff. So let's go to the next one. There's Article 128 at CIA headquarters. This was, I think, my favorite project that I did while I was there. Because, nothing becomes a curator like black titanium, and I worked very closely with General Metcalf at the Air Force Museum to bring an A-12 in for our collection. So, again, ours is number 8. It never flew operationally. Only 3 of the fleet did, and Senator Shelby got all 3 of those for Alabama. One is in Huntsville, one's in Birmingham, and one's in Mobile. So those 3 flew just 29 missions between 1967 and 68. So ours was the first of the fleet to be certified for Mach 3, and it has about 435 test and training hours in it. I asked for commemoration at the site because we lost 2 A-12 pilots during our program. Walter Ray was killed in 1967. He had a faulty fuel gauge. He was coming in to land at Area 51 and ran out of fuel. He ejected. There was a flaw in the ejection seat, and the separation sequence never initiated, so he never separated. And then in 1968, Jack Weeks, who had flown that mission over North Korea, was then flying a functional checkout flight. So the program had been canceled in 1966 in favor of the SR-71 program. There was a fly-off between the two, as you all know. And I'm going to cheer for our side, so I'm going to say we won it on a technical. We flew a single pilot, single payload, manual flight. Air Force flew the family model. They put a reconnaissance systems officer in the back, 2 additional payloads, and some digital flight. I'm teasing you now. So obviously the country couldn't afford both platforms. It cost $85,000 an hour to operate the A-12, and we didn't need both a clandestine program, covert program, and an overt program, the Air Force program. So in 68, President Johnson canceled the program, and we flew our last mission in May of 1968. The program was canceled in 66. So the pilots had to get the planes ready to fly into storage. So on the 4th of June, 1968, Jack was flying what's called a functional checkout flight, and many of you know these are some of the most dangerous missions pilots fly. He had a new starboard engine aboard that day. The aircraft has a system on board called Birdwatcher that monitors the electrical functions. And about 30 minutes into his flight out of Kadena down to the Philippines and back, Birdwatcher alerted that the starboard engine was overheating. We lost contact with him off the coast of the Philippines. No wreckage was ever recovered. So 2 stars on our wall for the A-12 program, and also a commemoration here at the site. Let's go to the next one. How are we doing on time? This is a good story. I'm wondering if you all knew this. So, pilot Dennis Sullivan was flying Article 129 on a mission over North Vietnam when his radar detected 2 active surface-to-air missile sites. So, during his second pass over Hanoi, the North Vietnamese fired at least 6 missiles at him. The missiles detonated behind the plane, but one came within 100 to 200 yards. And the post-inspection crew discovered 2 small pieces of metal that had penetrated the plane's lower right wing and lodged against the support structure by the wing's fuel tank. The fragments were not warhead pellets, but they may have been part of the debris from one of the missile detonations near the plane. And there they are. We have this in our collection. So in over 4,000 missions between the SR and the A-12, how how many times were they fired at, and this is the only time one of those aircraft was hit. Next slide. And here are 2 pilots that we lost. Walt Ray at Groom Lake, there is a monument there to him and Jack Weeks. Next one. So we're in 1975 here with the evacuation of Saigon.
Okay, this picture.
Air America flew over 1,000 sorties during those last days of April 1975. In fact, the artifacts I've included here, you see the Saigon facilities map there down at the bottom left. Air America met with the station personnel to designate 13 evacuation sites. And there they are on that map. We have the original map. And then you were supposed to listen to Armed Forces Radio for I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas. And that was your signal to get down to the flight line to evacuate. And it's that very famous photo that you see there. It's not the American Embassy, as a lot of people think. It's the Pittman Apartment Building. Station had designated that as one of the evacuation areas. That is an Air America Huey on top. And then you can see the gentleman that's leaning over to help pull people on board. That's a CIA Air Department officer by the name of O.B. Harnage. So Air America, as I said, flew over 1,000 sorties. They rescued thousands of our friends, but my favorite story is about a CIA wife. She had to evacuate along with her husband and everybody else, but she stopped by the orphanage on the way and she picked up 14 babies. And she took them down to the flight line, and the Air America crew said, "There's no room on this aircraft. You can't bring those babies on board." And she said, "Oh, yes, I can. Here's one for you, one for you, one for you." That's babies out to all the passengers on the plane, got those kids out.
Hold this.
We did a document release. The Air America archive is at the University of Texas at Dallas. And that's where the Doolittle collection is as well. In Henderson, not Henderson, but is it Richardson? I'm sorry, I can't remember. It's right outside of Dallas. So it's a great place to visit if you're in the area. And several years ago, CIA did a document release of about 10,000 Air America documents and held a conference. And one of those kids called us. And she said, "I can't be with you at the conference, but I just want to thank the CIA and Air America for the life I have in the United States." 350,000 Hmong were resettled as well, and countless Vietnamese. So let's go to the next. I think 17 stars on our wall are Vietnam related. We have 140 stars on our memorial wall now. When I joined in 1999, there were 77 stars. Now there are 140. So the war on terror has taken its toll. If you've ever had a chance to visit CIA headquarters, you would have seen this plaque in the upper lobby. It's our memorial to our proprietary airlines, Southern Air Transport, Continental Air Services, Civil Air Transport, and Air America. The coin indicates 243 lost. They're actually 258 now. And if you go to the Air America archive in Dallas, you'll see all the names listed on their plaque. Ours is a notional plaque because we still protect people's cover. Next one. So let's fast forward now. The painting is called Cast of a Few, Courage of a Nation by Jim Dietz. It was painted in 2008, and it captures a CIA operation in Afghanistan in 2001. So I think you all know that CIA entered Afghanistan 15 days after 9/11. How were we able to go in so quickly? We had President Clinton actually had asked CIA to write a paper on it in 2000. It was called the Blue Sky Memo. And he said, write a paper on how you would go into Afghanistan if there were no resource limitations, just how would you do it? And we had that in the bank and briefed President Bush on it 4 days after 9/11. Only CIA had kept relationships with Eastern and Northern Alliance tribal leaders, relationships that we had nurtured for decades since the Stinger missile program. And we had an air asset in Central Asia ready to go. This is that air asset. And on the 26th of September, CIA pilots flew Gary Schroen and 7 other agency officers, 3 air crew, and 2 Afghan pilots into Afghanistan with 2,000 pounds of equipment, extra fuel, and $3 million to take the war on terror to the enemy. 2 days after landing, the crew chief painted a new tail number on the aircraft to identify it as a Northern Alliance aircraft, and that number was 91101. You can see it in the painting. Now, this aircraft was the first American air asset into Afghanistan after 9/11. It enabled all of CIA's operations, supporting just 100 CIA officers, 300 special forces, about 15,000 Eastern and Northern Alliance against an enemy force of over 60,000. Heck of a lot of U.S. air support, right? Sometimes 100 air sorties a day. And in just weeks, that coalition overthrew the Taliban, killed or captured a significant number of the Al-Qaeda leadership, and denied a major terrorist organization its safe haven. Some details to point out in this painting. The 2 figures in the foreground are change of command between the 2 ground branch officers. The CIA crew chief is directing the offloading of more supplies. You can see the HILEY truck in the background, which was another workforce. The CIA global response team is taking up perimeter defense. Rotors stay hot, and you can see they take a little bit of a charge. They're in the center of the painting. These were all details that were important for us to capture. This Mi-17 is a Soviet aircraft. It's rugged. Why did we use the Mi-17? Because they're ubiquitous over there. They could fly the team from Tashkent to refuel at Dushanbe, and then through the Hindu Kush, through the passes at 14,005 and deep into the Panjshir Valley to the landing zone in Ostamy. So also see the little red dot up in the top left? And that's an AWACS. That's the angel on our shoulder watching everything. So this is an important artifact, and Katrina can identify with me wanting to collect this artifact. If you've ever flown an Mi-17, you describe it as 10,000 parts all trying to come apart at once. Katrina and I would want all 10,000 parts, right? So look at the clock there. That's the first piece I was able to get. That is the clock off of 91101. We keep the time set to 8:46, which is the time it was that the first plane hit the first tower. And then for about 10 years, I kept a dialogue open with Air Department to eventually collect this aircraft. I went to visit it, and they flew me on it. My first helicopter ride in my entire life was aboard this aircraft. Yeah. And the pilots had flown in Vietnam together. They were like an old married couple. So they put me on the aircraft, they put me on the jump seat, and they put the headset on my head. And so I could listen to their pre-flight checkout, and they're, nagging each other like an old married couple. And then they flew me for about 30 minutes on the aircraft, which now you know me well enough to know that I, of course, burst into tears because I was so excited to be on this aircraft. And after standing in front of pictures of it and collecting it, to meet it in person was just extraordinary. And then the flying on it was amazing. So next one. So for about 10 years, we kept the dialogue open, and eventually when it stopped working for our nation, we were able to bring 91101 to headquarters. When it was operational in Afghanistan, we painted USA and an American flag on top of it. It did not have a transponder on it. And so to tell the friendly aircraft that it was a Northern Alliance U.S. aircraft, that's why they painted it that way. So this is now on display at CIA headquarters in the CIA Aviation Park, which has 2 aircraft in it, an A-12 and the Mi-17. And, I'm no longer the museum director, so I'm not sure they love airplanes as much as I do, but I was very honored to bring these 2 aircraft in. Last slide. So I was at headquarters in September for the 75th anniversary, and we had a U-2 overflight of headquarters. So for all my decades of speaking about this program, of collecting it, of meeting the pilots, I've never seen a U-2 in the air until then. And protocol allowed me to go up on the roof to see it. So this is pretty much how close it was. It was pretty incredible. So the pilot took off from Beale at 0330 that morning with a sole mission, which was to overfly CIA headquarters at 1,000 feet. And from the rooftop, we could see him coming in northwest as a little black speck. And then as he got closer to us, that familiar profile took shape, and he came, I swear, he came straight for me, right over the building. You could hear him hit the throttle and take off, just like that. And then he turned right around and headed back. 11-hour mission that day, single mission to overfly CIA headquarters. I'm still high from it. It was so incredible to see the U-2 fly for us. So that's all I have for you today. I hope you learned a little bit. I know you all share my enthusiasm for aviation history. Maybe you didn't know some of CIA's stories. I'm happy to send you, like I said, some of our publications to fill in any gaps that I left, and I'm happy to take any questions you have.
Yeah. Did you have more than one radar station in Laos?
Did you have more than one
radar stations in Laos?
That's a good question.
I had a friend.
There were a number of Lima sites, but I don't know about the other ones. I only know about Lima Site 85, so I can look up that for you and get you more information on it if you want.
Well, there was a friend of mine in the Air Force said he was in Laos at one of these radar stations. He said the Vietnamese would come up the hill at night and they would use crossbows to fight them because they didn't want them to know where they were.
Cool. And see if he can tell you which number site it was.
I'm not in touch with him any longer, but
okay.
The other thing I wanted to mention was Howard Hughes' favorite film was Ice Station Zebra.
So that's based on that CIA operation, right?
He watched it over and over again.
Yeah, good stuff, huh?
Endorsement.
Chuck?
Yeah, Chuck Dorgan. I used to work at the agency as a contractor doing image analysis. I guess we called them green badges. And my wife was retired from there. But when I was there, I'm wondering, that museum had nothing on Corona in there. Is there anything in the CIA museum now that has to do with Corona?
On Corona?
Like film or anything that, there was that museum.
Yeah.
There was a little museum, in the building. And,
Right. So we just renovated the entire museum, multi-million-dollar project for the 75th. So I think if you search CIA Museum 75th, you can see some of the media coverage of it. And of course, because I helped develop the content, we have an overhead reconnaissance section. And yes, we have on display, we have a Corona model.
Okay.
We have a piece of a Corona bucket. We just got a Corona bucket in collection. And we have a Corona parachute and a couple of other artifacts related to Corona. So yes, We do tell Corona's story. We have a video of it in the museum. We have a lot of images on it. I can send you a link to a video that we have on it in the museum if you want. If Dudley, if you'll remind me, I'll do that. And I'll send you a Corona publication that we have. I'll send you a link to that that's online. So yes, we do talk about it.
One comment, the movie Ice Station Zebra was based on the Corona, on about the second Corona shot. It didn't come down where it was supposed to. Came down.
Oh, that's right.
Came down in.
Thank you for correcting me. That's right.
Yeah, it just came down in Pittsburgh. Somewhere else
Right.
in that area.
Thank you for reminding, yeah. Good correction, thank you.
Not a correction, just.
Any other questions?
I have a comment.
Go ahead.
Okay, I think the last pilot for the A-12s was Frank Murray. And we did an interview.
Yeah, we just lost him.
And he just passed away apparently. I interviewed
Yeah, he did.
I interviewed him a number of years ago, and he talked quite a bit about the loss of Weeks south out near the Philippines.
They were roommates, and he took that loss very hard. Yeah, he's told me that. So last time I saw Frank, I talked to him probably about two months before he passed. And the pilots have been, and we lost Colonel Collins the year before. Pilots have been very good to me, been very good to the museum, and enabling us, donating their artifacts to us to help us tell their story. And we had Frank into the building, and it's probably about 4 or 5 years ago, or no longer ago than that, probably 6 or 7 years ago, because I've been retired for 5 years. So Frank, we felt it'd be easier because we were going to be moving all around the building. We thought it'd be easier if we got him a scooter. So met him in the lobby on the seal, with the memorial wall and everything, and gave him his scooter. And you can't take the fighter pilot out of the A-12 pilot. Frank was doing wheelies on the seal in that scooter in the CIA lobby, I swear to God.
They're all like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was an interesting. I'll tell a story that maybe you might find interesting. It's on the video. No, it's not on the video. It was we walked out of his house. He lived in Nevada, Gardnerville, Nevada, and he had an A-12 on his mailbox out in front of the place. But at any rate, the story he told I thought was great. He said he had overflown Korea. He was the second flight over Korea that took the picture, and then a few days later, apparently, he overflew North Vietnam and had an engine failure. And so he landed at Tak Lee, I think it was, which was a U-2 base.
Yes.
So he taxis in and they hide the airplane really quick. So that night, I asked him, well, what did you do that night? Well, he's a fighter pilot, for Christ's sakes, he's going to go to the bar. So he goes to the bar and the guy taps him on the shoulder and says, Frank, what are you doing here? I thought you got out, because he had to join the CIA, so he got out. And he said, well, I'm just involved with Hughes now. I'm taking pictures and video photography, that kind of stuff. So anyway, the guy says, oh, okay. Anyway, years later, he's now been out for a few years, but returned as an Air Force officer. And somebody found out, oh, here's a fighter pilot that hasn't been to Vietnam yet. So it's like 1971, 72. So he gets assigned to fly A-1s, the slowest fixed-wing airplane they have in the Air Force. And he's down at Homestead going through water survival training, and that night he's in the bar. So what happens? Runs into the same guy. Frank, you're back. What happened? He said, oh, I got bored. I just had to. The guy looks at him real funny. He said, hey, wait a second. You were flying that black hype airplane at Tak Lee. He said, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, he told me that story. He said he didn't have any clothes when he landed either. He was just in his flight suit, so they go to the bar and borrow clothes from somebody. Oh, yeah. I found out from Colonel Collins something I didn't know, and that is he landed in A-12 here in Albuquerque on an emergency. And I didn't know that. I've got to double check that, look that up, and see, if that's in the record. Do you all have a copy of David Robarge's Archangel, the official history of the A-12 that CIA put out in 2007?
I think we
do you have a copy of that?
Yeah. Yes.
Do you? Okay, great. So it's online as well. I can send you that link. But yeah, that's David took the opportunity to declassify when we brought the aircraft in. declassify the rest of the program and use that in his history. So we've now got, official history of the program, which is great.
George?
You've been talking about the museum constantly, but I think it deserves it, but is it open to the public? And what's the procedure for visiting it?
So because the museum is located at CIA headquarters and we have people undercover, it is not open to the public. We push as much as we can out to other museums. I think we have artifacts at the Nixon Library right now. We traveled 60 of our artifacts to the Reagan Library, done a couple exhibits with Reagan. We traveled these 60 artifacts for about 5 years. We traveled the A-12 cockpit, which was really fun. So I had the cockpit pulled out of the A-12 in 2007, and now it's going to be in the building. So we have, if you check our website out, cimuseum.gov, you'll see about 150 of our objects from the collection. But because it's at headquarters and because we have people undercover, we have to protect those covers, and it's not, for that reason, it's not open to the public. So my speaking to you today is another way we can get our history out to a broader audience.
Very good. Any other questions?
Thank you.
That was superb, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for volunteering. We love our volunteers. And if you come to Albuquerque, let me know. I'll meet you over at the air park.
Well, we'll keep that in mind. Thank you very much, Tony.
No, I want to
All right, you all take care.
That was